Imagine waking up in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. No engine, no sails, no crew, just you, four wooden walls, the sound of waves crashing against a barrel, and 4,700 kilometers of open water between you and land. Most people call that a nightmare. Jean-Jacques Savin called it a vacation. In late 2018, a 71-year-old retired French paratrooper sealed himself inside a handmade wooden barrel and let the Atlantic Ocean carry him across to the Caribbean, relying on absolutely nothing but wind, current, and sheer stubbornness. 127 days, 2,930 miles, not a single engine. He made it. And then, 3 years later, at 75 years old, he tried to cross again. This time in a small rowboat. This time, he didn't come back. This is the story of Jean-Jacques Savin, the most extraordinary adventurer you've probably never heard of. Jean-Jacques Savin was born on January 14, 1947 in France, a country that has always had a complicated love affair with the sea, with adventure, and with doing things that make the rest of the world raise an eyebrow. From early in his life, Savin seemed allergic to ordinary. He served as a military paratrooper, which already puts him in a category of people who have voluntarily jumped out of perfectly good airplanes. After that, he became a private pilot, because apparently the ground was never interesting enough for him. He even worked as a curator of a national park in the Central African Republic, deep in the wild heart of Africa. He was the kind of man who, when he retired, didn't think about golf or gardening. He thought, "What's the most audacious thing I haven't done yet?" The answer, apparently, was crossing the Atlantic in a barrel. Now, before you imagine some tiny, leaky wooden keg rolling through the waves, let's be clear. This was a purpose-built capsule, an engineering project, something Savin spent months constructing with his own hands. The barrel was made of resin-coated plywood, roughly 3 meters long, half a ton of wood and determination, painted bright orange so it could be spotted at sea. Inside, Savin had built, in a space of about 6 square meters, a bunk to sleep, a small kitchen to cook, and even a porthole in the floor so he could watch fish and sea life passing below him as he drifted across the world. There was no engine, no sail, no motor of any kind, just the great Atlantic current, the same invisible river of water that Christopher Columbus followed centuries earlier, carrying him westward toward the Americas. And in true French fashion, he packed foie gras, a bottle of Sauterne wine to celebrate New Year's Eve, a bottle of Saint-Emilion Bordeaux for his 72nd birthday on January 14th, and, in the name of science, another bottle of wine to study how ocean conditions affect its aging. The ocean was his cellar. The current was his chauffeur. On December 26, 2018, Boxing Day, Jean-Jacques Savin sealed himself inside his orange barrel and departed from El Hierro, the westernmost island of Spain's Canary Islands. No fanfare, no enormous sponsorship deal. Just a man, his barrel, and the trade winds. The plan was simple in its audacity. Use the North Atlantic trade winds and equatorial currents, the same forces that carried Columbus in 1492, to push him across approximately 4,700 kilometers of open ocean to the Caribbean. He expected the journey to take roughly 3 months. He had no engine. If something went wrong, he couldn't just turn around. He was committed, physically, emotionally, existentially. Those first days were calm. Savin updated followers on Facebook, Yes, the 71-year-old was posting on Facebook from the middle of the Atlantic. He wrote, "The weather is great. I've got a swell of 1 meter, and I'm moving at 2 or 3 kilometers an hour." He posted selfies. He sounded, frankly, like someone on a pleasant weekend camping trip. But the ocean is never simply pleasant for long. Weeks passed. The barrel spun. The currents didn't always cooperate. There were storms. There were days of zero progress, when the trade winds died and the barrel sat almost still in the water. There were nights when waves several meters high crashed over the capsule, the interior plunging into darkness, Savin bracing himself against the bunk as the ocean threw everything it had at 6 square meters of floating plywood. He couldn't steer, he couldn't accelerate, he couldn't slow down. He was, in the most literal sense possible, adrift. He was also conducting real science. Savin wanted to prove a theory put forward by French doctor and adventurer Alain Bombard in 1952, stating that a journey across the Atlantic without any technical assistance is entirely possible. Along the way, he dropped oceanographic markers to help researchers track and map Atlantic currents, real data collected in the most unusual way imaginable. In March 2019, the crew of a NOAA research vessel, the Ronald H. Brown, was sailing through the mid-Atlantic when they spotted something strange on the horizon. A bright orange barrel, drifting alone, moving steadily westward. They had stumbled across Savin's capsule in the middle of the world's second-largest ocean, an encounter so improbable it felt almost staged. Savin was fine. He waved. He probably offered them wine. The weeks continued. January became February. February became March. March became April. And on April 27th, 2019, after 127 days at sea and 2,930 miles of drifting across the Atlantic, Jean-Jacques Savin's orange barrel arrived in the Caribbean. A Dutch oil tanker picked him and his barrel up and ferried them to Saint Eustatius, where Savin stayed a few days before a French tugboat took him on to Martinique. He stepped ashore. He was sunburned, thinner, and absolutely triumphant. He was 72 years old. He had just crossed the Atlantic Ocean in a homemade wooden barrel, and he declared, with characteristic French understatement, "Voyage successful." The world took notice. Briefly, wonderfully, Savin was everywhere, an oddly heartwarming story in a news cycle that was, as always, full of darkness. Here was a 71-year-old retiree who had built a barrel in his backyard, climbed inside it, and drifted across the Atlantic for 4 months. No corporate backing, no reality TV crew. Just a man who had decided that age was not a limitation. It was an invitation. He wasn't the youngest person to cross the Atlantic. He wasn't the fastest. He wasn't even using the newest technology. He was, in many ways, doing the opposite, stripping away technology entirely, returning to the most ancient form of ocean travel, being carried by the sea itself. There's something deeply philosophical about that. In a world obsessed with speed, efficiency, and optimization, Savin had deliberately chosen to be slow, to surrender control, to trust the ocean. And the ocean had delivered him. He also proved something important about aging and human capability. He had climbed Mont Blanc in 2015 at 68, crossed the Atlantic at 71. He was not coasting through retirement, he was accelerating. But anyone who knew Jean-Jacques Savin probably wasn't surprised. This was not a man capable of sitting still, and so, almost inevitably, the question became, what next? Jean-Jacques Savin had crossed the Atlantic once. For most people, or for any sane person, that would be the definitive final chapter of an adventure story. Frame the photos, write the memoir, except that you have already done more than 99.9% of humanity. But Savin wasn't most people. In January 2022, at the age of 75, he announced his next challenge. He would cross the Atlantic again. This time, however, he wasn't going to drift. He was going to row. On January 1st, 2022, Savin set off from Sagres, Portugal, the southwestern tip of Europe, in a rowing boat 8 meters long and 1.7 meters wide, carrying 300 kilograms of equipment including a spear gun, a heater, 2 water desalinators, freeze-dried food, and his mandolin. His mandolin, because of course, because when you're 75 and you're rowing alone across the Atlantic, you bring your mandolin. His destination was Martinique, the French Caribbean island, roughly 5,500 kilometers to the west. He expected the journey to take about 3 months. This would have been his 6th Atlantic crossing in his life, a staggering fact in itself. He named his boat l'Audacious, the Audacious. The early days went reasonably well. His support team monitored his GPS position. He rowed, he navigated, he updated his Facebook followers, he played mandolin, probably. But the Atlantic in January is not the forgiving Atlantic of trade wind seasons. The weather was difficult. Winds were blowing from the wrong directions. His journey had not gone to plan, blown off course by bad winds, which meant the trip would be extended by some 900 kilometers. He adapted. He recalculated. He rerouted toward the Azores, the Portuguese archipelago rising from the mid-Atlantic, to regroup before continuing westward. Upon his last contact, he was located north of Madeira, heading for Ponta Delgada in the Azores. He was still fighting, still rowing, still moving. And then, in the early hours of January 21st, 2022, just 20 days after he had departed Portugal, everything stopped. Savin sent 2 distress beacons to indicate he was encountering great difficulty with official last contact at 034. 2 distress beacons in the middle of the night, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. His support team on shore could do nothing but wait and watch. The Portuguese Coast Guard launched a search. Later that day, January 21st, his 21st day at sea, his boat was found overturned near the Azores. Overturned, empty. No Jean-Jacques Savin. The Portuguese maritime authorities searched the area around the Azores. They found the boat, l'Audacious, the Audacious, floating upside down in rough seas. A diver was sent below. What followed was a strange, painful confusion that deepened the tragedy. His support team said in a Facebook post, "The body of Jean-Jacques was found lifeless inside the cabin of his canoe l'Audacieux." The world mourned. News outlets around the world reported his death. France mourned a national legend. But then, the story changed. It was later revealed that Savin's body was never actually found, and he was ultimately lost at sea. The diver's initial report had been either misunderstood or prematurely communicated. Jean-Jacques Savin had not been recovered. He had simply vanished, lost to the same ocean he had loved and conquered and trusted for his entire life. Unfortunately, the ocean this time was stronger than our friend, he who so loved navigating, and the sea, his team wrote on Facebook. The mayor of Arles, his hometown on France's Atlantic coast, offered his condolences. "He was an extraordinary, atypical man," said Xavier Daney. mayor of Arras in Arcachon Bay where Savin lived, describing him as an exceptional adventurer. His daughter Manon, his partner Jackie, his team of volunteers, all left without a body to bury, without a final goodbye. Only the ocean, wide and indifferent, keeping it secret. What happened in those dark early hours of January 21st, 2022? We don't know. Perhaps a wave, one enormous, unexpected rogue wave, caught the Audacious broadside and capsized her before Savin could react. Perhaps he was knocked overboard and unable to right his boat in the freezing waters. Perhaps exhaustion, the cold, the accumulated weight of 20 days alone at sea played a role. We will never know. The Atlantic does not explain itself. Jean-Jacques Savin was 75 years old when he set out on his final voyage. 75, an age when most people are slowing down, careful about their knees, watching their diet, enjoying grandchildren. Savin was rowing alone across the Atlantic with a mandolin and a spear gun. There is something both magnificent and haunting about that. Magnificent because it represents the most uncompromising expression of what it means to be alive, to be driven, to be curious, to refuse to let age dictate the size of your life. Haunting because it reminds us that the ocean is not a stage on which humans perform. It is a vast, indifferent force that does not care about our ambitions, our stories, or our age. Savin knew this. He had spent his life in relationship with danger, as a paratrooper, as a pilot, as a solo ocean traveler. He understood the risk. He chose it anyway. Perhaps that is the deepest lesson of his story. Not that we should all climb into barrels and drift across oceans, but that there is a form of courage in continuing, in not stopping, in choosing. At 75, one more adventure, one more attempt, one more sunrise at sea. His 2019 barrel crossing remains one of the most remarkable solo journeys in modern exploration, and his final voyage, incomplete as it was, stands as a testament to a man who never let the fear of failure or the fear of the ocean keep him on shore. The Atlantic took him, but it also, for 127 days in 2019, carried him, trusted him with its currents, its winds, its rhythms. There is a strange poetry in the fact that the ocean both crowned him and claimed him. He arrived in the Caribbean with wine, sunburn, and satisfaction. He left Portugal with a mandolin, a spear gun, and enough stubbornness to fill an ocean. And somewhere out there, between Portugal and the Azores, in the cold, deep water of the North Atlantic, the story of Jean-Jacques Savin continues, unfinished, unanswered, and completely, magnificently audacious. If this story moved you, share it. Jean-Jacques Savin deserves to be remembered not as a tragedy, but as a legend. Leave a comment below. Would you ever attempt something like this? At any age. Subscribe for more stories of extraordinary people who refuse to live ordinary lives. The ocean is waiting.